Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy, one stop destination for civil services aspirants. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of the today's newspaper and extract the articles relevant for the examination, along with understanding the nuances for answer writing and also taking a look at the type of questions which can be asked from these articles. Today, in our entire analysis, we are going to consider 10 different pointers and 10 different articles, so to say. Now, some of them are going to be relevant for the mains and some of them relevant for the prelims examination. Starting with the first article that we are going to discuss is the article which has appeared in the editorial section, that is the medical boundaries for AYUSH practitioners. That is the Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, homeopathic practitioners. Now, this is relevant for your GS paper 3. We are going to talk about the relevance of this and why this has been in news. Build on this joint statement to try and save Gaza. This follows the international diktat, so to say, or a memorandum regarding what has been happening in Gaza and to save the Gazans from the mayhem carried on by the Israelis. So, this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, why antitrust regulations are pertinent. What are antitrust regulations? Why is it very, very vital in today's day and age when we are taking a look and when we are coming across digital monopolies like Google's of the world? So that is relevant for your GS paper 3 economy portion. Then what is Maharashtra's new security bill, which the government says is targeted against the urban Naxals? So, very briefly, we are going to take a look at what is the argument of the government and why is it that there is such a strong opposition against this new security bill, relevant for your GS2. Now, there's a longer article which has appeared in what is the science section. That is, India has the highest number of slum dwellers in the flood prone areas. Now, this is a particular topic from where repeatedly questions have been asked in GS paper 1 as well as in optional areas. So, in GS portion, relevant for GS 1 as well as GS paper 3. Now, some of the portions we are going to discuss for the prelims perspective. For example, the Badaga community is in news owing to the festival. So, what is that community? Where do you find this community? And also, what is the festival about? Species in news. Golden Jackal has been in news. What is the conservation status and the features associated with this particular species? NISAR satellite is going to be launched in this particular week. And what is the purpose of this satellite? Industrial growth slows to a 10-month low. Having said that, there is a change in the manufacturing sector growth. What is it? And Indian Coast Guard has been developing and looking to commission the new ship, that is Samudra Prachet. What is its purpose? So these are the various different articles and topics that we are going to discuss for the relevance in the examination. Having said that, in order to ace the examination, the idea about current affairs in itself can never be sufficient. You need a strong foundation for the GS subjects. And for that, we have come up with a very lucrative offer price where you get one on one mentoring, the availability of the best lectures from the best educators of the country, special doubt clearing sessions in the live classes, answer writing practices for the development of the mains preparation, and overall a comprehensive view and strategic development for success in the examination for 2026 or 2027. So do avail the offer and use the code IAS English in order to gain more discount. So that is for the day. And now we come to the first article of the day. The first article talks about the medical boundaries for Ayush practitioners. Now, what are and who are Ayush practitioners? Ayush practitioners basically are those medical professionals, so to say, who specialize in Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, as well as homeopathic medical cases or that particular branch of study. Now, there has been a debate which has been triggered in this particular month owing to a kind of an online exchange of views between Indian chess master, that is Vidit Gujarati, and a very known, well known online hepatologist or a particular doctor who specializes in liver diseases. Now, that has been a spar which has gained prominence online. So, that is the context in which the article is written. I have put the screenshot as well for those of you who don't have the background. So, basically, it all started from 1st of July. 1st of July in our country is celebrated as National Doctors' Day. Why? So, 1st of July is basically important in our country because of being celebrated as Doctors' Day. Why do we celebrate Doctors' Day on 1st of July? That is because 1st of July marks the birth as well as the death anniversary of one of the most prominent doctors in post-independent India. That is Dr. B.C. Roy, Bidhan Chandra Roy. Now, that is the birth and the death anniversary of Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy. Now, he was a prominent physician as well as the second chief minister of the state of West Bengal. He was also awarded with Bharat Ratna in the 1960s. So, that is why the Doctor's Day is celebrated on 1st of July. Now, on 1st of July, Indian chess grandmaster Vidit Gujarati basically tweeted a family photo talking about celebrating doctors. Now, it so happens that in his family, many of the members are actually Ayush practitioners. That is, the practitioners of Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy medicine, and that particular background. Now, that instigated a reaction from one of the doctors online who also runs a social media account by the handle The Liver Doc. And basically, he called out saying that Ayush practitioners are not, in fact, real doctors. Now, that sparked a debate, and it has been going on for a month now, that do we consider them as real doctors or not? Now, this is not a new debate, by the way. This is a debate which has been going on since 1940s and even prior to that. When you had the origin or the genesis of the Western medicine, so to say, the allopathic medicine system, which worked on the basis of evidence as well as empirical evidence that which particular drug, which particular tablet or medicine can treat a particular disease. Since that point of time, there has always been a kind of a voice, an opinion that even our traditional medicine systems, such as Ayurveda, they have a very strong medical foundations and they should also be respected. So, here in this, with the help of this article, we are going to take a look into the background that when did this debate start and why is that debate between medical practitioners and Ayush practitioners being awarded the same pedestal? Why is that very relevant in modern India that we see today? So, starting first of all with the historical background, you see, when we talk about the genesis or the birth of the modern Indian medical system, and when I say medical system, basically I'm referring to the educational system in medicine and also the kind of hospital arrangements, etc., that you have. Now, the entire foundation of it is said to have started in 1946. In 1946, the government set up Sir Joseph Boer Committee. Now, Sir Joseph Boer Committee came up with multiple recommendations about what Indian medical system should look like. Now, at that point of time in the 1940s, you had many voices talking about the revival of Ayurvedic systems. You had multiple voices writing articles in the leading journals of the day talking about the fact that how Indian medical system in itself was self-sufficient, but owing to foreign domination and the actual deprivation and destruction of Indian medical system by the foreign institutions and the foreign countries, that is why we are in this state. Otherwise, our medical system was very well developed around 2000 years ago and even beyond that. Now, in the face of this kind of a controversy, Joseph Boer Committee basically gave a very clear-cut recommendation that modern medical practices, that is, the so-called Western medical ideas or the allopathic medicines, should be preferred going ahead in Indian medicinal system. So that is when in 1946, Health Survey and Development Committee, that is the Joseph Boer Committee, endorsed modern medicine and recommended the phasing out of traditional medicine systems. Mind you, 1940s, in fact the entirety of the 1900s, that basically witnessed the transition from traditional medicine into modern medicine across the various continents of the globe. It was not only something which was observed in India, but other areas, for example, even in China. You had that debate about the traditional medicine system as well as the modern medicine system. So every region of the world, they basically struggled with this idea about what should be prioritized. Now, obviously, in 1946, when the recommendations came, it basically created a huge amount of backlash. The practitioners of Ayurveda, yoga, homeopathy, etc., they basically saw it as a kind of, again, another foreign oppression. So that is when, in 1948, a committee on indigenous system of medicine was set up. Now, that supported Ayurveda and linked it to the cultural identity of India. Talked about the fact that Ayurveda refers to a way of living that we Indians have always inherited. While it had certain qualities and certain good points that the committee actually proposed, but the committee's entire recommendation overall was wrapped in the idea of revivalism of nationalistic ideas. That is something that the article argues. That this committee, which was set up in 1948, was particularly biased in its opinion, owing to the fact that it gave major amount of prominence to the idea of traditional Hindu nationalism. That is what the article argues. And that is why this particular committee's ideas and recommendations should not be taken seriously, as per the article. But what is relevant for your examination in this entire background? In this background, relevance for your examination is the Bohr Committee. Bohr Committee, basically the recommendations that it provided was not only restricted to about traditional versus modern medicine, it was something which spanned across the entire medical sector of India. So, for your examination, this is something which is not in the article but is relevant for your examination. So, for that, you should know about Sir Joseph Bohr Committee's recommendations. There were four major recommendations, so to say. And today's medical system across the country is revolving around those four major recommendations by the Bohr Committee. What were the recommendations? Now, the first recommendation was basically integration of preventive and curative care. Of preventive and curative care. Now, what is the meaning of it? Now, when you say curative, curative means, let's suppose you are suffering from a disease. Now, you go to the doctor, they give you a medicine, you pop the pill, get better. That is curative. What is preventive? Vaccines, right? So, if you take vaccine against flu, you don't get impacted by flu. So, Sir Joseph Bohr said that look, only emphasizing preventive care won't suffice, only sufficing on curative care will lead to additional burden on the healthcare. So, overall, the healthcare policy have to look at the idea of integrating both of them. And today we see that both of them they walk hand in hand. Then, importance to the primary healthcare centers or PHC. That was also recommended. Importance of PHC. Then, after that, the three-tiered medical system, tiered medical care. Now, what do we mean by three-tiered medical care? So, you basically have the primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare system. Primary, the one that you find nearest to the gram sabhas and the villages where your basic treatments, tests, etc., can be carried out. Secondary, lesser in number, where you go for a greater amount of diagnosis, a deeper diagnosis, and deeper cure. And then tertiary, referring to those super specialty hospitals, or in certain particular cases, the elite hospitals that you find in the urban regions. So that is where, and this is basically a simplified version of the primary, secondary, tertiary that he recommended. And then he recommended the reform of medical education in. So this were some of the major medical education in India. These were some of the major recommendations of the Bohr committee. And since that point of time, Indian medical system has basically relied upon these basic pillars. Now, having said that, coming back to the debate, now for a long period of time, that is in the 50s and the 60s, there was not greater attention paid to either Ayurveda, Unani, Yoga, Siddha, or homeopathy, or the so called Ayush field and that domain. In 1970, however, a legislation was passed, and that basically was the Indian Medicine Central Council Act to formally recognize the Ayurveda, Siddha, and the Unani stream. Now, to give some amount of weightage to it. Now, this was eventually amended in 2020 to add greater teeth to this particular domain. Now, the aspect that whether an Ayurveda professional or a professional who is an expert, let's suppose in yoga or Unani or homeopathy, now are they sufficiently empowered or are they sufficiently educated to prescribe you modern medicines or not? That is the question at hand. For example, let's suppose you are suffering from a serious or a severe ailment. You go to a nearby hospital and you find that someone who has been trained in Ayurveda, now that person is carrying out your surgery. Would you feel comfortable or not? That is where the article, and in fact, the authors of the article argue that this is a travesty of medical sciences, where when we talk about Ayurveda, Ayurveda talks about the role of Atma, the role of dosha. Now, correct or incorrect, that is a debate for a separate day altogether. But that is what the ambit of the study revolves around. But however, it is seen and it is observed in certain particular medical fields and in certain particular areas as well that these professionals who have studied about doshas, atmas, etc. Now they are also carrying out certain basic type of operations, surgeries like gallbladder removal, appendix removal, etc. Now, whenever you carry out any particular kind of surgery, now you need to administer anesthesia, you need to administer antibiotics. Now, both of them, they don't ascribe to Ayurveda system. So that is where a mix and match policy comes to the fore. And that is where the patients, they have, in many of the cases, they have been on the side of bearing the consequences. Many of them have basically gone to the doorsteps of the judiciary as well. And in the case of the Supreme Court, the case when it was brought to the doorsteps of the Supreme Court observed that the Ayush practitioners recommending modern medicines, that is illegal. However, who can prescribe such medicine? That is an important question. If Ayush practitioners cannot prescribe you modern medicines like paracetamols or the keterols of the day, who can prescribe you that medicine? And is there a law associated? So, the basic law which deals with that is the Drugs and Cosmetics Rule 1945. Now, this rule 1945 talks about registered medical practitioners who can prescribe modern medicine. Now, who are registered medicinal practitioners? Are they the ones who have the MBBS, MD degree, etc.? No. It is completely up to the discretion of the states. And each of the state has got their own different kind of norms that they follow. As a consequence, there is enough leeway in these rules that even Ayush practitioners end up prescribing these medicines. So basically, state governments use the Rule 2EE of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act to empower the Ayush practitioners to prescribe allopathic medicine. Now, the judgment is important for your examination as well. The judgment is Dr. Mukhtiar Chand and others versus the state of Punjab and others. Now, in this, the Supreme Court ruled that allowing Ayush practitioners to prescribe modern medicine would be. However, the Supreme Court basically said that this is something which the states have to empower and the states have to take a final call. So, Supreme Court by this order empowered the states. Now, what is the situation in the states? We have discussed that the states, they have variability in terms of who are the registered medical practitioners. And that is why in many of the cases, there are irregularities. Now, in a health system that we have in our country, where there are a lot of people who require health care, but they don't get it because of lack of medical professionals or lack of institutions, Ayush practitioners are important part of the healthcare system. The government in its new healthcare policies, etc., they have always basically tried to empower them. But empowering them at what cost? We still don't have enough empirical evidence based research in the Ayurveda area, in the homeopathic sector, where they talk about the growth of these medicines and, for example, which particular herb in the case of Ayurveda can lead to what kind of treatment and in what quantity. We don't have empirical evidence in majority of the areas. Yes, in few of the simple ailments like flu, cough, cold, etc., there are certain evidence based studies. But then in modern medicine deals with a lot of varying issues, from brain diseases to various different type of lifestyle disease. So that detailed study is not carried out still in the, that means the patients are exposed to danger. But more than that, many of the medical colleges, what they do now, these medical colleges, they hire BAMS professionals or graduates, bachelor in Ayurveda, medical sciences. So they hire BAMS graduates. Why? Because as compared to MBBS graduates, the BAMS graduates are available for hire at a cheaper price. Now, as a consequence, they are the ones who are going to subscribe or basically prescribe you with the various medicines. As an individual, as a patient, when you go to a particular hospital, do you always inquire the degree of the doctor? No. Oftentimes, you are in so much pain that the doctor visiting you in itself is seen as a blessing. So that is where many of the patients are caught blindsided. They are not aware that who is treating them. On top of that, in the case of many of the Ayurveda professionals, in certain states and in certain regions, these Ayurveda professionals have been allowed to carry out minor surgeries. Now, that in itself is cited by the article as a kind of issue, issue which can endanger public health care in a region like India. So, what should be the way forward? Now, the government is trying to empower Ayush systems, fair enough. But research should be empowered rather than simply allowing a kind of a carte blanche to all the professionals of the Ayush field that any one of you and every one of you can also prescribe modern medicine. They should be restricted in the usage of, they should not be allowed, in fact, to prescribe modern medicines. Let the modern medicines be restricted to those who have studied them. If Ayush professionals are prescribing, they should be prescribing medicines in their own area. This cross hybridization is again endangering the lives of the population. However, in a country like India, where healthcare is still one of the major problems plaguing the development of the society, that is where we do need these professionals, but their role has to be defined by the state government, and the state governments have to take a call in. Okay, so that is about the entire article and the background of this. Now, let us take a look at the practice question. Allowing Ayush practitioners a free run in modern medicine is a necessary comment. Now, this is a 15 marker question. Basically, what is the question? What is the purpose of the question? The purpose of the question is, it is asking the candidate that Ayush practitioners in modern medicine, it is bad, but it is something which is necessary as well. And you have to comment. So you can take both sides of the argument, you can justify it and criticize it as well. So, how do you initiate your answer? First of all, the intro. What do you write in the intro? In the intro, you can start by who are considered to be Ayush practitioners. Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddh, and homeopathic. These are your Ayush practitioners. This is the branch of the traditional medicine system which has been followed in the country for hundreds, if not thousands of years in the case of Ayurveda. They have got their own role in the society in terms of wellness and promoting a particular way of life. Thereby, what you ensure by writing this introduction is you are not appearing to be condescending towards Ayush or absolutely critical, or in a way, you should not be appearing to look down upon the Ayush practitioners. Right? So, that is basically where you talk about the role of Ayush practitioners very brief. Now, then in the body, you talk about where they come in, what is their importance, and why do they find relevance in modern day society. Relevance, modern day, right? And why that relevance? So, why is that relevance? That relevance is owing to the gaps in the healthcare system, belief in the traditional healthcare systems that you have, escalating cost of modern medicine, right? Some amount of disillusionment, so to say, where people have had bad experiences with modern medicine, right? So the issues of trust, etc., with the Western medicine system. That is why they are relevant. However, then come to criticism. Criticism. That is lack of research, research, right? Now, the proponents say that it was well researched 2000 years ago. Today, we don't have evidence. Then carry out the research again. We cannot base a prescription based upon what was done 2200 or 2300 years ago. Right? You cannot prescribe someone a life saving drug based upon that, okay, there was some evidence it is no longer present anymore, but we believe this can cure you. So, that is a lack of research and empirical based or data centric ideas of patient cure. So, these are the areas where you can criticize. Lack of idea about the Western medicine, allowing them in surgeries, hiring them as normal medical professionals without associating the aspect of Ayurveda or homeopathic like that. So these are the criticisms that you can talk about. Now, if it is a 15 marker question, thereby, see, what is the tone that you take in your answer? If in the answer you are talking about favoring the Ayush medical systems, then quote a particular committee. Which committee? The committee about the traditional medicines, right? However, if you are taking a side of basically favoring the Western medicine or allopathic system of medicine, you have to necessarily cite the 1946 Boer Commission recommendation in order to substantiate Boer Committee, okay, recommendation that you have to cite. Eventually, how do you conclude? Healthcare of any particular society ends up defining the future growth potential of that society. One cannot endanger that by uh, due to sheer ignorance or lack of research or policy mismanagement. Need of the hour is for the states to delineate the areas in which the medical practitioners can perform their activities and defining their roles the last possible venue. So, like that, you can end the answer. So, that is the question that you should try to write on your own and try to frame the pointers on your own. Okay? Now, after this, we come on to the next article. Build on this joint statement to try and save Gaza. What is the context of the article? The article is written basically after a joint statement by about 30 Western countries, so to say, including the UK, France, and Italy. All of them have called for the end of war in Gaza. Now, many of the people across the world, they are calling this war on Gaza as a genocide. Now, there have been thousands and tens of thousands of people who have died, many including women and children. The condition in Gaza is really grim. Now, when France basically issued this or co-issued this statement along with UK, along with Italy and so on, now that was responded in a very terse manner, in a very strong manner from Israel and was opposed even by the US. Israel and the US, they talk about the fact that basically, if you are talking about ending the war in Gaza, you are in a way, ignoring the atrocities which happened in the October 7 attack, which was the trigger point of this Israeli offensive in Gaza. But the European countries and the Western nations here argue that your basic purpose of launching the offensive, that would be different. But what is happening in Gaza right now is something which is a human disaster, where people are forced into starvation. And that is where the term genocide is gaining grounds again. Now, the article argues that this co-statement, which is issued by the global nations, that should be taken as a kind of a platform from where we can bring an end to the war in Gaza. Now, you see, genocide. What is genocide? Genocide basically is made out of two terms. Geno, Geno is a Greek term referring to a particular race, ethnicity, a particular national or a particular identity. And then side means killing. So you are killing individuals based upon their beliefs, race, nationalism, religion, or so on. That is considered to be genocide. This was used for the first time in 1944 by Raphael Limerick in order to indicate what was happening in the region of Europe by the German Soto. Now, genocide, the definition I will tell you and I will indicate to you in a brief moment as well. But when we take a look at what is happening in Gaza, can it be termed as a genocide? So, the article produces certain numbers for you. What are those numbers? You see, Gaza basically had a population of close to around 2.3 million when the war in Gaza started. And the war started in October 2023, almost 1.5 years ago. Now, almost 2 years ago. Now, 60,000 have been killed, many of them women and children as well. Now, presently, as per the estimates, and the entire population is restricted in an area of 46 square kilometer. Think about it. 46 square kilometer is smaller than many of the cities that you can think about. So the entire population is restricted in an area of 46 square kilometer, having a population density of close to around 43,478 people per kilometer. Now, if you have 43,000 people, 43,500 people living per kilometer, you can imagine that what would be the condition in terms of food, in terms of medicine, etc. That is very scarce. Now, what Israel as a policy, Israel has been following since October 2023 is it has starved the region of any particular medical aid, so to say, starved the region of food aid, and so. So, as a consequence, people in many of the cases they have died due to illnesses, diseases, as well as starvation. Amnesty International, UN, all the bodies, the global multilateral agencies, all of them have called this as a gross disaster which is created by human cells. Having said that, whether in true form it is a genocide or not, the International Court of Justice takes decades to come at the conclusion of it. So we cannot expect the ICJ or any of the international courts to take a particular ruling here that it is a genocide. And having said that, when you have countries like US, Germany, the biggest backers of Israel, the biggest arms suppliers to Israel, now they have not basically condemned this war and they have not even co-authored the statement seize action or to seize the war. So Germany and US they still support Israel in all its might because the arms industry is also supported and also because of the ideological support to the Israeli state. That is where the article argues that it is high time that the international community take a note of these daring numbers which are in front of us and the Israeli policy, so to say, to basically restrict the entire Gaza population to a one city. And there has been a systematic argument that various different previous Israeli prime ministers, as a matter of their policy, they have tried to ensure that the Gazans, their power is limited and their ability to live a free life is also restricted. Now, this has basically was initially the onslaught by the Israeli forces was across the entire Gazan Strip, but now it is concentrating on the population center. So that is the entire argument of the article. Now, what is a genocide? Genocide is the deliberate and the systematic destruction, whole or in part, of a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group through killings, persecution, and other acts intended to annihilate them. Now, here, the national aspect is where the onslaught in Gaza justifies it to be termed as a genocide. Now, it is the death by starvation, which is considered to be one of the worst forms of torture available to mankind. And that is something which is not very common in the 21st century, was used as a form of warfare in the early 1900s, but not today. So today, if Israel is doing that, can the global south, including countries like India, can we still choose to remain silent? So the article argues that this co-statement by UK, France, Italy, and other 30 member states, or basically the global north, when they have called for the cessation of aggression in the region of Gaza, that should be utilized to extend pressure on Israel by India, Russia, China, Brazil, and the rest of the globe. Because the need of the hour is to save people's lives based on the humanitarian basis and to stave off or prevent the crisis which is brewing in the region of Gaza. So that is what the article argues. Okay? Now, after this, coming to the next article. Why antitrust regulations are pertinent. So, here, first of all, before coming to what the article is talking about, for those of us who are not aware about it, what is antitrust regulation and what is its genesis? That is, from where was it born? You see, it can often happen that in a particular area of production, for example, let's suppose you take any particular consumer item like, let's suppose, an FMCG sector, you consider toothpaste. Now, in toothpaste, if you have only one manufacturer of toothpaste in a country and you don't have any competition, then what can happen? That particular manufacturer can stop the supply of the toothpaste if required. Now, it is a necessity for day to day living. It can hike the price, it can keep on all the savings to itself or profit to itself. So, that is a kind of a monopoly, and that can influence people's lives in large, right? And we have seen that these kind of activities by the various different producers, manufacturers, etc., that has impacted lives across the world. For example, in the 70s, the oil producing countries, they formed the what is the famously referred to as the cartelization of OPEC nations. That is, they formed a group or a cartel whereby they agreed to limit the supply of oil. Now, as a consequence, importing nations like India, we suffered a kind of balance of trade problem because we are dependent on oil. Now, when the supply was limited, obviously the price increased. As a consequence, we suffered and we had to basically get a kind of a bailout and we had to even borrow more. So, this impacts the globe and the world economy. Now, that is why you need to have certain regulations which stops this cartelization, stops this profiteering or monopoly action in an economy. That is known as antitrust regulation. When did it start? So, its genesis is laid in 1890 in US. And in 1890, this was basically a senator in US, that is John Sherman. Now, John Sherman, while arguing about the famous Sherman Act, which is the basis for all the antitrust regulations across the world, John Sherman famously said, if we cannot accept a king as a way of ruling in our life, basically, monarchy was going out of favor in the late 1800s. So, if we cannot accept a king in a way of life, how can we accept a king in the manufacturing process? Basically talking about why concentration of power in economy can be very, and this led to the founding of the very famous Sherman Act. Now that was the basis of all the antitrust regulations across the world. Now in this particular case one has to understand that when we talk about antitrust regulations, yes, in manufacturing sector they are important and so on, but in the present day and context it is the digital economy that we deal with. And in the digital economy, you have giants like Google, right? Meta, etc. They are the ones who, in a way, end up controlling many of the industries and how they operate. So that is why in the modern era, these antitrust regulations are a must. So let us now break down this article further. First of all, what are antitrust laws? So these are regulations that encourage competition by limiting the market power of any particular firm. Because when you have a competition in any particular sector, that means you basically have relevant pricing, better products, and better efficiency being promoted. Now, this often involves ensuring that mergers and acquisition, they don't overly concentrate market power or allow to form monopoly, as well as breaking up firms that have become monopolies themselves. Antitrust laws also prevent multiple firms from colluding or even forming cartels, whereby they can control the profit and the price. So, that is basically the case of antitrust laws. And here in India, which is the organization which is responsible for this, for framing the antitrust laws in India? In India, you have the Competition Commission of India, the CCI. The CCI is one of the gatekeepers of antitrust regulations in our country. Now, in digital medium, we do have a substantial stake at hand. For example, India's digital economy is expanding, contributing around 11.7% of the GDP in 2022-23. Now, growth has been driven by tech savvy entrepreneurs with over 31,000 startups in 2023 as compared to 2,000 in around 2014. Now, majority of the startups that we have in our country, they are digitally driven. But there's a problem there. When we talk about any of the startup, now the startup in the digital sector, they end up utilizing the services of the tech giants which are settled abroad, for example, Google. Now, Google has got a great market penetration across the world, including India. For example, Google's Android. When we talk about Android systems, Androids have around 95% market presence in a country like India, right? So they are overtly prominent. Now, if suppose tomorrow you have to launch an app, tomorrow you decide that I will launch a separate app for solving certain problems in my city. Now, your app can never be successful unless and until you list it on Play Store on the Android system. Now, for hosting it on Android systems, Google will charge you some amount of money. So, let's suppose you have launched a firm ABC, a startup. Now, you have to, in order to survive, you have to have this uh, organization or the app listed in Android system. For that, you will pay Google some amount of money. Now, because Google is so very prominent in the market with 95% market share, Google can always ask you more money. Tomorrow, next year, Google can say, give me more money. As an organization, you have to survive. So, what will you do? You will provide more money to Google. Now, because Google is very prominent, Google is very powerful, then what will happen? As a consequence, you will see that Google can change the regulations as well. Tomorrow, Google, if it faces competition, it will say that I will not allow your app to be listed on my platform. Then what will you do? You will automatically be marginalized. People won't be able to download your apps. And as a consequence, as an organization, you will suffer. So that is where the antitrust laws And antitrust regulations are very important in the digital sector. Various different regions like the European Union and various countries thereby, they have been taking strong actions against these US firms. And India also should frame very strong regulations. Now, the case in point, or the issue, so to say, is triggered of around which the entire article is written, is the fact that Google permitted only two formats of real money gaming. Right? That is, what is real money gaming? Real money gaming is when you are playing something on your phone. Thereby, you are allowed to put your money, bet your money into it, and you win certain rewards as well. So that is real money gaming. Now, as a pilot project, Google allowed only two types of real money gaming in its entire platform. That is daily fantasy sports, where you bet on the sports outcome. For example, you have the Dream 11s of the world and so on. And then on Rummy. These were the only two areas where Google allowed the real money gaming. And this is where Indian startups such as Winzo, which basically brought about the idea of playing chess, Ludo, etc. Now, those particular startups, they were losing. Initially, when Google brought this idea of real money gaming, now it launched this pilot project at the same time in Mexico as well, in Brazil as well, along with India, to understand what the emerging markets are doing. Now, within a due course of time, it withdrew this pilot from Mexico and Brazil, but allowed this to function only in India. Now, think about it for a brief moment. So, first of all, let me provide you with a chronology of it. So, introduced as pilot program in 2022 in India, Mexico, and Brazil. Eventually, withdrawn from Mexico and Brazil, but allowed in India. Even in India, in terms of, for example, when you play any game online, all of you would be aware of that. When you play a game online and you have to buy certain commodity in the game, you pay some amount of money, isn't it? For example, 100 rupees to buy certain credit points, etc., etc. Now, there's a third party payment app also. So, Google controlled the payment app through which you can basically play the game. So, in a way, again, restricting the entry of certain startups into this particular area, right? So, that is where controlled the third party payment app, the payment app. Now, by this way, it automatically phased out certain startups, then increased the revenue ask price, the price, and even delisted some of the Indian startups. So that is where the digital sector, in a way, is basically performing at the whims and the fantasies of organizations like Google. The day that they basically turn out to be very stringent, the entire aspect of the startup, the digital based startup ecosystem can come down crashing. So that is why there is need for antitrust regulations, particularly in the digital medium. Now, this has been taken up to the Competition Commission of India. You basically had one of these gaming apps in India, Winzo. Now, Winzo was one of those upon which Google took some action. And this was seen as a kind of a monopolistic action by this tech giant. That is what the article is arguing, that in the face of the growing ecosystem of startups, in the face of increased digital penetration in India in the modern era, there is need for a very strong and stringent antitrust regulations to be framed against these digital outcomes. Why? The reason. So, whenever you have this monopolistic action in the digital medium, now this stifles innovation, as I told you. When Google is able to control the third party app through which you make payments in the games, obviously, as an individual, you cannot even think of innovating your own payment app system. So it is stifling innovation. Secondly, it blocks new age businesses by promoting the existing ones and having lot of entry barriers for the new age businesses to come in, reduces the consumer choice. You don't have endless amount of choice out there. Then increases the cost of doing business for the new startups, lowers initial public offerings, the IPOs, because the organizations cannot go so big, and concentrates power, or leading to a kind of monopolistic actions. So this is basically the issues which are faced. Okay, so that is why antitrust regulations in the digital medium is the need of that. So, in a very brief nutshell, what have we discussed in the article? What are antitrust regulations? What are antitrust regulations? Right? I hope we are aware to prevent monopolistic action, cartelization, profiteering, excess profiteering, including mergers and acquisition, which is the body in India which is responsible for that. So you have CCI. The genesis or the birth of this antitrust regulation, that is the Sherman Act, relevance in the digital sector, relevance in digital sector, digital medium, and the issues which lack of this enough antitrust or deep enough antitrust regulations, the issues that they create. Other than that, we have also discussed a case study of monopolistic action by Google. Okay, so this case study can be relevant for your examination in the mains, and also you can have direct questions being asked from them. Okay, I hope this is understood. Tech savvy entrepreneurs. Yogesh, tech savvy entrepreneurs basically refers to who are well versed with the technical world, the technological world, rather to say, and who utilize the technology in order to forward their startups or in order to build their startups. Tech savvy. Okay. And then I have Nad Brahmar. Okay, you have an out of context question about geography. Please restrict your question associated with the topics in discussion, right? So, PDF of all session from your course on Unacademy is enough for geography optional preparation, or still reference books are required to be referred. So, PDF is sufficient. However, I would always suggest that for your optional, revision from book is always important. There is no optional, and there are no notes out there in the world where I would say only this is sufficient. Yes, in certain areas, for example, in models and theories, notes are sufficient. In certain areas, for example, migration theories, the notes are more than sufficient. In Indian geography, book is something which you. Okay. Lower public offerings basically refers to that. When do you go for IPO? When the business becomes large enough so that the public can invest, but the business is never going to be large enough as long as there is monopolistic control over that. So that is why you have lower amount of IPOs, and that means the economy is always stifled. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the practice question. Discuss the need for stronger antitrust regulations in India in the digital sector. So, first of all, in the intro, what do you write? What are antitrust regulations? Very vital. That is one of the ways in which you can introduce, or you can talk about relevance or importance of digital sector in Indian economy. Digital sector. There you can talk about that as India eyes a Viksit Bharat by 2047, aiming an economy to the size of 30 to 35 trillion dollars, role of digital sector is going to be ever important. The sector, which is growing at 11% per annum and providing employment opportunities to millions of population, that is something which needs to be regulated or rather monitored. Then you talk about, if you have started the introduction in this way, in the body, one sentence, what is antitrust? Okay, talk about what is it. Thereafter, talk about the fact that what are the issues which the digital sector is facing. That is dominance of certain organizations which are sitting in foreign land, right? So dominance in digital sector by Googles of the world, right? Then after that, talk about the issues. Once you have talked about the issues, thereafter you mention that why it is important. So that is something which is substantiated. And after that, the relevance of antitrust, of regulation. Okay? Like that, you can end the answer. How do antitrust laws and Siddharth Krishna T? Antitrust laws do not reduce consumer choice. This is basically the issues which are faced due to lack of antitrust laws, due to monopolistic action, holistic actions. Hence, in order to remove them, hence antitrust regulations are needed. Trust regulations are needed. Okay. So antitrust regulations, they will always promote consumer choice. I hope this is understood. Now, then coming on to the next article, what is Maharashtra's new security bill? So Maharashtra Assembly has basically passed by a voice majority a particular bill which is aimed, as per the argument of the government, at curbing the Naxal activities, and it is targeted against the so-called urban Naxals. Now, setting the context and telling you what the entire argument and the article is about. So basically, the problem of Naxalism or left wing extremism in our country has been faced for a long period of time. Now, that is where the governments, and so as to say, various different governments and various different state forces, they have said that the role or the support that these left wing extremists receive, that support is not only restricted to the rural and the fringes of the forests where they are to be found, but that support, funding, etc., comes from the urban areas of the country. And those urban supporters and that particular echelon of population or that particular class of population which supports the Naxals, they are known as urban Naxals, owing to the shared ideology and owing to the support to the Naxal. Now, this idea of urban Naxals has been prevalent in the entire security paradigm and security system for decades now. Now, having said that, various different governments have brought in multiple different regulations and legislations in order to curb this Naxal activity. In the face of it, Maharashtra becomes the fifth state, mind you, not the first state, fifth state to bring about a strong anti Naxal law targeting the urban Naxals, which are the other states which have brought about it. So you have the states of Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh who have already brought in such kind of stringent laws in order to control the Naxal activity. Now, when the state government has brought this, the argument by the opposition has been that look, on one hand, you are saying that you have basically restricted the Naxalism only to two districts of the state, and then you are bringing in laws whereby you are in a way curbing the freedom of expression of rest of the population by saying that urban Naxalism is prevalent. So either you have not managed to restrict Naxalism, that is why you have brought in. So that is where the opposition is asking questions. The government's argument is that look, wherever we have carried out the raids and activities and actions against the Naxals, we have found incriminating evidences in the urban areas, talking about the centers and the strongholds and the hideouts in the urban areas from where they keep on receiving various different kinds of help. So that is why we need to have a crackdown at these urban Naxals. But the argument is that the laws that have been framed are so draconian or so stringent that they can be manipulated by the government in order to consent. It can be used against journalists. it can be used against opposition parties, it can be used against people having opposing views as compared to the government. So that is what the entire argument has been. Now, the what is the situation on the ground? The bill has been passed by the assembly. The bill is waiting the nod from the governor. In the meanwhile, two different groups have basically met the governor talking about why this should not be allowed to form an act. So that is the case of the argument, right? Now, first of all, we start with the context. So, Maharashtra legislature passed the Maharashtra Special Public Security Bill, or bill to provide for effective prevention of certain unlawful activities of left-wing extremist organizations or similar organizations. So that is the law in question. That is the security law. Now, first of all, we will consider what is the argument provided by the government, and then we will talk about what are the reservations expressed by the opposing party. So, first of all, what is the argument of the government? The argument is that we have to do this in order to control or curb the action of urban Naxals. Now, what do they say about urban Naxals, or why do they need to create activities against the urban Naxals? So they say that there are evidences in the form of what and from where. So, based upon the raids that they have carried out, based upon the security forces' actions which have been carried out in the various different parts, the evidences indicate economic and ideological support. Economic and logical support from the urban area, right, to left wing extremists. So that is why the government says we have to prevent this. And that is for which we need the law. And there are four other states which have also done so. And Maharashtra government is saying that we are not the first state to pass this law. There are four other states with such stringent laws. Which are the four other states? All of them, the red corridor region. So you have Chhattisgarh, Chhattisgarh, then you have Odisha, then you have Telangana, and then basically have Andhra Pradesh. These are the four states which have already passed this. And we are also doing the same because we are also impacted. But the opposition is that look, all these states have passed the law prior to the UAPA, right? The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which in a way has been framed in order to curb these kind of activities, right? So all these are prior to the framing of UAPA. That is what is the argument. Now the argument is that once you have UAPA, why do you need to have this another draconian law? And another point of opposition is that the government's argument is that Naxalism is restricted only to two districts, only in two districts. So why do you need to pass this stringent act if you have managed to reduce Naxalism by other means? And there are certain nuanced arguments made. The argument against the bill is it empowers the government to declare organizations illegal without a due process of investigation, right? Allows suppression of facts in public interest, allows the government to extend ban on an organization without any limit to the duration of the ban. It can be a lifetime ban as well. Has the potential to criminalize regular opposition under the aspect of illegal activity, excludes lower courts from passing jurisdiction on any of these processes. So, as a consequence, judicial remedies are put out of the window, provides full protection to state officials acting in. So, in a way, this can lead to state oppression and suppression of freedom of expression. So, that is the argument against basically the Maharashtra government. That is why there are multiple petitions being signed and submitted to the governor. So that is where the present condition is. What is the way forward in this? Way forward. Now, the reality of the day and the whatever we say, reality of the day is that this bill, in all probability, will become an act. Having said that, this particular law, whether it is justifiable, whether it is fine, or whether it stands for the nature of justice, etc., that is where it has to be taken to the court of law. And there are multiple petitions which are already lined up to be taken up before the relevant authority. So we should wait for the judiciary, take a look at what is the observation that the judiciary makes. And eventually, as the when we talk about the civil society and the public organizations, the NGOs, now they have to be extra careful, taking a look at the various different arrests or acts, again, under this particular bill, which have been carried out by the state government, and due process of the law is followed or not. That is something that as a citizenry we have to be. Now coming on to another article, that is, India has the highest number of slum clusters in flood prone. Now this is an article which talks about the fact that when we talk about flood prone areas, now flood prone areas in most of the cases are the floodplains, isn't it? Now, floodplains, they have a lot of these slum dwellings. In India, you have millions of population, almost to the size of Russia, which lives in these slums in the floodplain. Every other rainy season, when you have River Yamuna, which floods, River Mithi, which floods, River Kuam, in the case of Chennai, which ends up flooding, River Musi. In all the rivers moving through metropolitan cities of India, whenever they flood, you find a common argument which is made in almost all the articles that the floodplains are encroached by the slum dwellers. As a consequence, the flooding has been very vicious. Now, it is a reality that millions of population in our country, they reside in slums, particularly the urban slums, and that too in the floodplain. What do we mean by floodplains, by the way? So, when you consider any particular river system, let's suppose, now this river system will have the area, the vicinity. Now, during the rainy season, when the water is high, this river can expand. There will be deposition in the form of clay or sediments, right? If I show you the cross sectional view, let's suppose this is the cross sectional view of the river channel. Now, during rainy season, the water will swell up, depositing sediments in the region. Now, this entire region in which the sediments have been deposited during the previous action of a flood, that is a floodplain, right? So, these are the areas of the flood. In our country, even in countries like Indonesia, around Jakarta, in regions like Brazil, in many of these countries, developing nations, you will find large amount of poor population residing in these floodplain. Why? Because our cities, we don't have that kind of planning in our cities to think about what is the going to be the demand for housing. For example, a person, let's suppose, migrating from Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or Bengal to Mumbai. Now, obviously, they won't be able to afford a house in the Bandras or the Worlis or the BKC region of Mumbai. Now, they have to, I'm talking about the low skilled migration. That is, the laborers, the daily wage earners, etc., when they migrate. Now, when they migrate, oftentimes they need to find a very affordable and a very cheap housing, and that is available in the vicinity of the city, outside the city limits, outside the core business district, or the central business district, the CBD. And that is mostly across the river plain, because that is unclaimed. That is declared by the municipality of the city as a no development. But because of lack of monitoring, the development of the slums happen in this. Now, also, we have to understand that these are the regions where there are deposits of the sediment. So, you have a plain region, you don't need much of the constructional background, or much of the cost involved is not there. So, you have tin roofs, etc., which are hastily constructed, and you have a slum habitation which grows. In many of the floodplains, People also start growing vegetables nearby because the land is fertile, and that gives them an additional source of revenue. All of this, mind you, is illegal. All of this is illegal, but it is carried out. Now, what is the outcome of it? Outcome is that, look, in many of these floodplains, what happens due to development of housing, etc., the topography or the slope of the land changes. Earlier, all the rainfall in the city would drain into the river. But now, owing to the new topography, all the water will accumulate, leading to the flooding of the cities, isn't it? Plus, the slums constructed in this region, now they won't have clean drinking water supply, they won't have sanitation or drainage facility. So, they will be exposed to unhygienic condition. As a consequence, their healthcare burden will increase. They will fall ill more regularly. Human capital is not utilized, isn't it? And the city in itself starts to degrade because here you cannot have proper transportation facilities which are developed. Why? Because the municipality still considers it to be a no development zone. So as far as the municipality is concerned, there is no construction here. But in reality, the reality is very different. So that is what you observe in the floodplains across the world. In India, the problem is much more exaggerated. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about the various data pointers which substantiate it, basically, Moody's report estimates that across the world, around 2.3 billion people are exposed to flooding annually. In India, around 60 million people alone, they are basically prone to coastal or inland flooding. India has the world's highest number of slum dwellers living in flood prone areas, around 85 million population, akin to the entire population of Russia. So the problem is grim, the problem is massive. But why is it that people are settling in the it is not out of choice. But the reason is there is lack of planning. None of the cities they think about 20 years or 40 years in the future. All of them are still managing the requirements of the 80s and the 90s. So, lack of affordable land, housing is not there, real estate driven expansion, which basically is restricted up till the floodplains, inadequate drainage infrastructure, administrative neglect, and flood zones are oftentimes cheaper. The article here also points out another interesting fact. When you talk about European nations such as, let's suppose, Belgium, Netherlands, in these regions, or for that matter, when you consider London. Now, in all these particular regions and these cities, you will find that the side of the river or the river bank is one of the prime properties. But in developing nations, it is one of the worst properties. That is about the management of the land. So, here, what is the way forward? What is the solution? The solution is simple. We should not ignore those people living in the floodplains anymore. Now, the municipality needs to take care of that population, make them stakeholders in terms of ensuring proper drainage, sanitation, drinking water facilities are provided to them. After all, this is a part of our sustainable development goal. Which sustainable development goal? Important for the mains exam. So you have SDG 11, SDG 1, and SDG 6. All of them can be fulfilled by taking care of the population of the slum dwellers, particularly in need for risk informed spatial planning. Planning is the root solution to all the problems. Long term planning, something that China has been doing for the past couple of decades now. Then, community collaboration for disaster preparedness. You see, when we talk about climate induced disaster like flooding, drought, etc., it is the poor and the vulnerable who suffer the most. The poor who are driven into these floodplains owing to the housing crisis, they always have their houses submerged or drained away. So there needs to be a preparedness to handle that disaster. For that, awareness drives are required. Moving beyond traditional infrastructure planning to adaptive, people centric models. Slums must be integrated in the modern infrastructure. That is a way forward. In a country like India, where rural to urban migration is massive, and is going to be much more prominent in the coming decades, and we have a growing population, we cannot allow a large section of population, the tunes of around 85 million, so to say, be impacted by these harsh conditions. Way we are wasting the human potential and the demography that we have. Now, after that, coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims. So, starting with this image which has been depicted in the first page of the newspaper. This image here, you would see robe-clad tribal population basically walking uphill in the region of Udagamandalam in Tamil Nadu. So, this is the Badaga population, the Badaga tribes. Now, the Badaga tribes, basically, the Badaga tribe, they live in the Nilgiris, one of the largest tribal population, the Nilgiri, right in Tamil Nadu. Okay. Now, the prime activity that they carry out is agriculture, and thereby they are involved in. Traditionally, they would always be involved in millet cultivation, but nowadays, owing to tea plantation and monocultural practices in the region, they are also involved in tea, but in small amount. Now, what is the language that they speak? The language is basically a dialect of or a derivative of the Kannada, right? The Kannada language. Having said that, the language and the scripture has got the Tamil influence, which is also overwhelming. So that is where you will find that the language is a kind of a Kannada Tamil mix, which is spoken in this region of the Nilgiri. Okay, now they celebrate. Now, in this image, they are basically celebrating or on the way to celebrate the Devahabba festival, which is a festival of the harvest season. Now, it is a way in which they end up thanking the gods, and they basically pay the reverence to the spirits for a healthy harvest. Now, in this, you will find that in various different villages, different types of very interesting customs are and traditions are followed, which includes walking on a bed of fire, etc. Or in general, nowadays you have the potatoes which are roasted in fire. So that is a kind of a common practice of the Devahabba festival, that is roasting of potatoes in fire. So the Devahabba festival, also known as the God festival, is a harvest festival celebrated by the Badaga community in the Nilgiris. Typically takes place in July, sometimes in first week of August, and marks the end of agricultural year and the harvest. Expression of gratitude, devotion, and the communal harmony and unity. So that is relevant for your exam. Now, a species in news. So, a detailed study has been carried out for the state of Kerala's golden jackal population. Now, when we talk about the golden jackal, now they are well known to be surviving in semi urban or peri urban landscape that is surrounding human habitations. And these are omnivorous species, and they are to be found across large stretches of the world. As per IUCN, they are of least concern. But as per Wildlife Protection Act, they have been listed under Schedule 1, providing them with a greater protection. So, what are certain features of the golden jackal relevant for your exam? Strictly nocturnal in areas where you find the human habitation. Otherwise, they are partly diurnal elsewhere, that is active during the day. Nocturnal, active during the night, diurnal, active during the day. And what are those species who are active during dawn and dusk? They are known as crepuscular. Okay. Now they dig caverns for shelter and use the crevices or the cracks in the rocks for shelter. They are monogamous. They mate for life. Now they are omnivore in terms of the dietary pattern, abundant in valleys and along rivers, even across the seashores. Having said that, they are rare in foothills, so they are found in low altitude, not in high altitude areas. North and East Africa, Southeast Europe, and Southeast Asia to Burma find the population. Conservation status, IUCN least concern sites, there also the conservation status is reduced. Appendix 3. Appendix 1 is maximum conservation, it is Appendix 3, and Wildlife Protection Act 1972 listed under schedule relevant for the prelim. Now, NISAR satellite mounted on GSLV for launch tomorrow, that is Wednesday. So this is a particular satellite which is co-developed, jointly developed by NASA and ISRO. It is a synthetic aperture radar satellite which will have a very detailed monitoring of the Earth's surface. Now, this is a particular project which has been in the offing for a long period of time, owing to technological factors and delays. Now, this is a satellite which was supposed to be launched last year itself, but owing to delays and technological aspects, the launch is supposed to be tomorrow. Now, this is going to be a very unique and a complex launch. First of all, it is going to be launched on aboard GSLV, right? Now, that is the Indian vehicle, so to say. And when it is launched, it is going to be launched in the sun synchronous orbit as a consequence. And when it will be finally placed into the orbit, it will be a complex mission where, first of all, the satellite will be placed and then the antenna will be unfurled. That is a unique antenna which is provided by NASA. Now, this is a dual aperture satellite, which obviously increases the amount of observation that can be carried out. So, dual frequency is SAR, that is the aperture radar. You have the L band by NASA and S band by ISRO. Now, will provide all weather day and night imaging. For what purpose? For monitoring the slightest of the changes on the Earth's surface. To monitor Earth's surface changes with high precision using advanced radar aperture technology will be vital to monitor movement of glaciers, ground deformation, landslide, earthquake, agricultural practice, mineral presence. So slightest of changes on the ground can be measured with greatest precision. So it will help in mitigating or basically preventing the disasters caused by climate change, adapting to it, and will increase the climate collaboration between India and the US. Okay? Now, after this, we come to the next article, that is industrial growth close to 10-month low of 1.5% in June. Now, this is basically talking about Index of Industrial Production or IIP. Now, this is the growth is there, but it is very low. 10-month low. Last time it was observed was basically, this is about June. The June data has been released. So last time it was observed was in August 2024. But this time, the growth has reduced owing to the contraction in the mining sector, mining and electricity. Previously, we have discussed that how contraction in electricity is always a bad sign in economy because electricity demand is something which has to be growing. Unless and until so if the electricity demand is reducing, that means the industries are not utilizing that much. The argument which is provided is obviously the case that this time the month of June was comparatively cooler as compared to last year owing to humongous rains in many parts of the country. But at the same time, industrial output is also muted. Having said that, there are mixed responses and mixed signals. When we talk about the manufacturing sector grew at a 5-month high of 3.9%. It is the primary sector which provides high employment opportunities. So that is where the primary sector needs to be looked at. And that is where electricity, why the demand is declining. Does that indicate a larger dip in demand in the economy? That is something which will be much more clearer after the entire quarter results are declared. Now coming to the last topic, that is basically with the help of the image. So Indian Coast Guard has basically been helping or basically building the Samudra Prachet. Now, Samudra Prachet vessel, which is designed by Goa Shipyards Limited, is the Indian Coast Guard vessel to fight against or to take care of pollution, to ward off or fight against oil spills. So, this is a very unique vessel which will be aiming to take care of marine pollution across the coastal exclusive economic zone of India. We have seen the impact of marine pollution already being experienced in the Kerala coastline owing to a minor oil spill and a marine disaster. So that is where Samudra Prachet and these kind of vessels they become important going ahead in the future. This brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was helpful and has enriched your content to some level. If you have liked the session, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.